Well, we did invite a representative from RBS to appear on the programme, but no one was available. We are joined now by the Conservative MP, Jessie Norman, who is a member of the Treasury Select Committee. And Jessie Norman, one is tempted to ask, if the state can't keep a bank straight, who on earth can?
No, I know. These are extraordinary revelations. And the idea that the Royal Bank of Scotland, 83% owned by the taxpayer, should have set up this global restructuring group not to deal with large multinationals, but to focus on small and medium-sized businesses whose complaints have been filling the inboxes of every MP in the country for 4 or 5 years is absolutely amazing.
But we actually didn't want to put anybody from the Treasury on the board of RBS precisely to let it do what you're talking about. And in fact, of course, we do have this UKFI intermediary body which is supposed to look after it. Clearly it's fallen down on the job.
Well, it is a question that we'll have to be asking on the Treasury Committee side as to whether or not UKFI was acting. It's not clear how far the bank's own management, forget UKFI as shareholder or the directors, knew what was going on. The whole point about this global restructuring group was that they were run as a profit centre, so not taking businesses, helping them to work through their problems and as a service, but actually as a means of making profit for the bank. Now,
but in today's report, it suggests this is a culture. This is a culture in the bank. If the managers didn't know what was going on, they should have been shot.
Well, that's an extreme
but this is an extreme situation. No, I'm not really advocating to shove a bullet, but I mean, they should be fired at once and possibly prosecuted.
Well, there is a wider question as to whether or not there is a culture of ripping off the small business embedded within the Royal Bank of Scotland. That's the question that's got to be answered. This group suggests that they were not operating alone. They were able to make their own decisions. That's another weakness, but they must have been reporting to higher levels of management. The question is, how much did they know and when did they know it?
But the amazing thing is that within the government, it was the business ministry that blew the whistle, not the Treasury. They found out about this. How and what kind of a joined-up government is this if you have two departments? One knows this is going on and finds out about it, and the other doesn't, and the other one is the one that pulls the strings?
Well, to be fair, there are two reports today. There's Mr. Tomlinson's report, which is a private piece of work commissioned by Vince Cable, and then there's the large report, which is commissioned by the Royal Bank itself in response to Treasury and public pressure. So these things have come together to create the scandal. One gives you, as it were, the scoops, and the other one gives you the wider picture. And of the two, it's really the large report that in a way there's more troubling.
And how quickly will your Commons committee get to this and steer us through this jungle?
Well, it's not my committee, but the committee, and as you know, we're pretty involved with things like the Co-op and the Reverend Flowers at the moment, so we've got a fair amount on our plate, but I'm sure we'll get to it as quickly as we possibly can.
Jessie Norman, stay with us for a moment, because there's another issue, but we'll come to that in a moment. But what is the bigger picture behind the crisis at RBS?
Well, half a decade on, it shows the difficulty of managing this toxic behemoth in the state sector with multiple conflicting, often incoherent objectives. The two reports announced today, one of them, the message was lend more to small businesses. The other one was, well, when you do lend to small businesses and they get into distress, they're treated too aggressively. And then even within that, the overall objective of government policy is to get a return for taxpayer. That requires a higher share price, which requires higher returns. And the reports today say pretty clearly that lending money from RBS, in fact, across the sector to small business, does not generate high returns. So difficult, even 5 years on, in managing those three objectives.
I don't want to sound cynical, but the Treasury bounced out today not to talk about RBS, but to talk about something completely different. Good news to bury bad news.
Well, that's rather cynical, John, but let's be very clear. I mean, perhaps the Chancellor's got a taste for strong arm of the state now, but it was a huge surprise that George Osborne announced this action, not just to direct or to say that the Financial Conduct Authority, the regulator, has the power to cap the cost of payday loans, which can reach thousands of % over years, to cap that cost, but that they should use that. It was a surprise, primarily because the FCA itself said in a consultation just weeks ago that this probably wasn't a great idea, and it would only know if it was a good idea when it has the full powers over the sector from April. And not just that, the government itself had the opportunity to vote for this sort of cap with amendments to the Financial Services Bill in 2012.
So this is a U-turn?
Well, the government says it never was against. It was never against this. It just sort of said it maybe isn't the best idea. So maybe more of a three-point turn than a U-turn.
Jessie Norman, you voted when there was a vote in the Commons not to have a cap.
Yes, the situation at the moment is interestingly different. We now have evidence about what's been happening in Australia, where a cap appears to have been working. And the government's actually not, as it's sometimes been suggested, rushing through new legislation. It's just attaching an amendment to an existing bill to say that the Financial Conduct Authority will have a positive duty to implement such a cap. And that's a slightly different thing.
But nevertheless, it and you have made a 90-degree turn.
No, I don't think so.
180 degrees.
Well, I mean, 360, let's give it 720. We can keep spinning. No, I think the answer, the truth of the matter is, new evidence has come to it. And also, I think, frankly, the Chancellor rightly has been responsive to public concern. Everyone's very angry about the cost of living at the moment. It's clear that this is a very finely balanced issue in some areas as to whether or not you kill off payday lending and drive it underground and make it illegal. That's something no one wants. And the question is, will the cap strike the right balance? That's what they're trying to work on.
But in a word, the Archbishop of Canterbury was right. Wonga, no longer.
Well, that's very flip and clever, but actually, it's the Wonga aren't the worst of these folks. The worst of these folks are the ones who make all their money from the delayed payments, and that's something slightly different.
Jesse Norman, Faisal.